me getting the chance to be a part of this, and I want to create history. I want to win trophies, and that's ultimately the biggest motivation for me. And I feel like this is a perfect place for me to grow even further and to take my game and to next level and help the team as well.
Welcome to the Sporting Planet, the world's view of sport. This week from the UK, Singapore and South Africa. This is the show that brings together international voices who are passionate about sport and live and work in the regions where major events take place. Now, after more than £3 billion was spent in the Premier League alone in one of the most bonkers deadline days in history and the eventual end of the Alexander Isak saga, football's summer transfer window is now shut.
Yes, the squads for many sides across the world are locked in for at least the next few months, with lots of new faces for fans to get used to. But who did the best business? Have Liverpool completed one of the best transfer windows ever? What were the knock-on effects for the likes of Newcastle, Natalie's beloved Brentford, I see she's wearing the shirt, and others from Isak's moves? And who will be the hidden gem of a signing that will transform a club's fortunes and get every other club thinking, we should have signed him? We'll try to answer all those questions and more on this episode of This Sporting Planet.
Natalie Sawyer here in the UK alongside Edward Russell in Singapore, and in a little bit we're going to be joined by European football expert Kevin Hatchard to help us review what's turned out to be a brilliant summer for this transfer window. But first, we've got exciting news to bring you, and joining us, a new addition to this Sporting Planet's family from South Africa. Let's give a warm welcome to Carol Tshabalala. Carol, how are you?
Yay! I am super, really excited, coming to you live from a sunny South Africa. It feels good to finally join this extraordinary league, as it were.
Well, we're so happy to have you with us, Carol. For those, though, that might not know you, tell us a little bit about you and what we can expect from you on This Sporting Planet.
All right. So I am a sports broadcaster for 25 years now. I'm known as the First Lady of Sport. Obviously, the major sporting events that I cover primarily is the beautiful game. It's football, number one sport on the African continent. And I'm also extremely passionate about the sweet science, boxing. So I love my boxing. You can look forward to that. I love my basketball as well. You know, for many years, the NBA Africa offices were in South Africa. They've now since opened offices in Nigeria, Kenya, and the like. So very, very passionate as well about basketball and the NBA.
Very nice. And nice to have another time zone that we're all going to try and get used to on This Sporting Planet. We're used to doing these at all different times around the world. We're going to be talking a lot about the Premier League, Carol, in this episode. What impact does the Premier League have in South Africa? I know they're big football fans over there, aren't they?
Very, very big football fans. That's the number one sport in the country. And through the years, as we know, there've been a lot of African players, a lot of players from South Africa who've celebrated the likes of Stephen Pienaar, of Lucas Hadebe, and currently Lyle Foster, who's at Burnley. So lots of celebrations. We follow the Premier League a lot. The head offices of SuperSport, which is how the rest of the African continent gets to watch all of the Premier League action, is in South Africa. Of course, I work for SuperSport as well. So we are keen followers of the Prem and we love it. Number one.
Very nice. Well, it's going to be fantastic to hear your thoughts, not just on this episode of This Sporting Planet, but throughout the rest of our season as well, Carol. Now, just a reminder, in between episodes, you can keep up to date with all the global sports news on our social channels and YouTube page, including full-length interviews with all of our guests. So make sure to check them out. And whilst you're there, please do give us a follow, subscribe, and share with all your friends and family. Plus, please do leave us a review as well.
Okay, let's turn our attention now to one of the most bonkers football transfer windows of recent times, which slammed shut earlier this week across many of the world's top leagues. Just to bring you some of the headlines, and really the Premier League has dominated the headlines when it comes to spending, which has exceeded £3 billion, which is just simply remarkable. It's a total this year that has been spent more in the Premier League than combined between the Bundesliga, La Liga, Ligue 1 and Serie A as well. £415 million of that £3 billion was spent by Liverpool, which is the biggest spend in a window by a Premier League club. And that included the signing of Alexander Isak on deadline day, which has now become a British transfer record. £125 million signing. Add-ons could take it up to £130 million. And let's not forget, Liverpool had smashed that record earlier on in the window when they bought in Florian Wirtz for £116 million. So, goodness me, Liverpool had some money to spend. Joining us on this podcast right now to reflect upon what has been a crazy, crazy summer of spending, it is someone who knows pretty much everything there is to know about European football. It's Kevin Hatchard. Kevin, how are you? Great to have you with us again.
Yeah, great to be back, and very exciting window. It was certainly busy, as you well know, Natalie. It didn't stop, did it really?
No, it did not. And there was plenty of sagas, which I'm sure we'll sort of get to a little bit later on, and, you know, player power and where that shift has now gone in football. But that's to come a little bit later on. What I think will be good to get from all of us before we really sink our teeth into everything is just to kind of find out what hit the headlines in your region. So, Edward, let's come to you in Asia.
Yeah, I mean, here in Singapore, Natalie, the majority of football fans, Premier League fans, are Liverpool fans. So, of course, the Alexander Isak, will he, won't he, saga that raged on was the one that really captured the imaginations of most. But as I kind of extend outside of Singapore to Asia as a whole, one of the biggest deals outside of Premier League club from Premier League club was a deal that happened what feels like ages ago, because this transfer window has felt so elongated. Son Heung-min moving from Tottenham Hotspur to LAFC, Los Angeles FC in the MLS. Apparently, his LAFC jersey became the highest selling of any athlete in the world following the announcement. That's not just surpassing the likes of fellow MLS star Lionel Messi, but LeBron James, Cristiano Ronaldo, Steph Curry. In sport, in the world in general, Son Heung-min's was the most popular jersey for at least a couple of weeks. Now, this has been viewed by the LA Sports Entertainment Commission as equivalent to Shohei Ohtani moving to the Dodgers. We got a Japanese player going to the MLB and a Korean player going to the MLS. And demand for LAFC home games has skyrocketed more than 10 times. His debut sold out all 22,000 seats, I think, in about a month before the actual match took place. And just as JTB, which is the Japanese Tourism Board, has signed a deal with the Dodgers to basically bring tour groups of Japanese players to watch Shohei Ohtani, there have now been tourist packages set up for Korean fans to come to LA and watch Son's matches. And in fact, Son has been very much relishing this whole big US celebrity now. He threw the opening pitch at Dodger Stadium last week. Not a bad pitch, actually, it's got to be said. But there was no Son Shohei photo, unfortunately, to break the internet, because Shohei was the starting pitcher, so he was warming up in the bullpen well before the game started. One more, if I can just kind of, I know we're going to begin in the Premier League, so I just want to feature someone that's outside of that very quickly. Calvin Verdonk has made a breakthrough for Indonesian football. He's joined Lille, the Indonesian left-back, making history as the first Indonesian player to play in France's Ligue 1. Apparently, his Indonesia coach, Patrick Kluivert, played a key role in making that transfer happen. So it just goes to show how global football is, that you've got a Dutch manager coming to Indonesia and helping an Indonesian player go to France.
Love that. What's the name to look out for again?
Calvin Verdonk. He plays for Lille in France's Ligue 1. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Carol, what about with you in Africa? What stood out in this window?
Oh, definitely Liverpool as well, this side of town, hogging the headlines. But then the knock-on effect with the Isak move, of course, was the Wissa, Yohan Wissa. And he was the biggest African player, that move on deadline day. So lots of eyes on that. But what's been making chatter a lot since the season has started has been that of Sunderland. And the number of African players that have been signed, 7 African players, and lots of eyes, particularly on the 21-year-old Senegalese Habib Diarra. A lot expected from him to keep Sunderland in the top flight. So that's been something that's been quite exciting. 7 African players, even a player from Mozambique. So, yeah, I think you're going to start to see a lot more Sunderland supporters from the African continent this season.
We were talking about it before we were recording about how there was a lot of Brian and Burma, Johan Wieser fans at Brentford. They were playing red and white stripes. It's not too difficult to support Sunderland now, really, based on that alone. Kevin, let's come to you. Obviously, you're based in Europe like I am. So if we were to part the Premier League for one moment, I know you cover a lot of German football. How was the German transfer window?
Well, I think it was dominated by Premier League clubs, really, because Bayern really wanted Florian Wirtz. That was quite clear, that as soon as it became known that Wirtz wanted a new challenge and wanted to move on from Leverkusen, it was widely expected that Bayern would be his next destination. That had been on the cards for months. And then as soon as he spoke to Liverpool and Arne Slot, that turned his head. And that was a massive setback for Bayern, because Bayern had hoped to pair Wirtz and Musiala, which is what Julian Nagelsmann will do with Germany at the World Cup, should Germany qualify next year. But Bayern haven't been able to do that. And I feel like from that moment on, Bayern was scrambling a bit. Luis Diaz has come in. That's a big tick against Bayern's name, because any time a Bundesliga club can bring in a major Premier League star, that's always seen as a really big deal. But I think generally it was what we often see with the Bundesliga, was that it's about developing talent and selling it on at the right price. And you look at the players that have left. Xavi's gone from Leipzig. Benjamin Šeško went to Manchester United. So you're talking about hundreds of millions that have flowed into the coffers of Bundesliga clubs. But the gamble is, can those clubs now develop the next generation?
As a German football fan, Kevin, how sad is it to see that historic Leverkusen side under Xabi Alonso just be absolutely decimated? I think there's only a couple left from that historic side. And secondly, does that mean that decision to sack Erik Ten Hag, I don't know what insight you have on Ten Hag and if he supposedly lost the dressing room or not, but it's pretty harsh on him, isn't it, given that he had to basically rebuild an entire new team?
Well, I think if we deal with that first, I think that's more to do with things behind the scenes, actually, than what happened on the pitch. What happened on the pitch wasn't great, actually, but it was more to do with a complete disconnect between Ten Hag and the sporting director, Simon Rolfes, and the CEO, Fernando Caro, and they've spoken about that since. They've said that they felt it was heading in the wrong direction and they had to act. And you only have to look at some of the public statements. Erik Ten Hag came out and said that Granit Xhaka would not leave the club, had 3 years left on his contract. They'd already lost a lot of leaders. There was no intention of letting him go. Within days, Xhaka was gone. Then you had this situation with what formation were they going to play? And Simon Rolfes came out publicly and said, this squad is built for a back three, which is what we used under Xabi Alonso, so I think that's what we'll be playing. Well, Erik Ten Hag has generally not played that system in his coaching career, so you could see straight away there were cracks there. They were really underwhelming in pre-season. They were smashed by a Flamengo under-20 team. And so I think this has been bubbling up. So I wasn't hugely surprised that he did part company with the club. Maybe the timing of it was surprising. In terms of the team being taken apart, it is what it is. That's just the football food chain, unfortunately. When you get a club that's not used to winning trophies, not used to competing at that level, and then they do manage something extraordinary, those players are going to move on. That always happens. It happens with the Ajax team under Ten Hag that got to those Champions League semi-finals in 2019, and it's happened with Leverkusen as well. To an extent, it's happened with Dortmund over the years as well. That's just how the modern game is.
Just in terms of European football then, in general, Kevin, it does feel as though the gap is clearly widening between the wealth and the finances of Premier League sides and the rest of Europe. How concerning is that when you consider then it just feels as though, as much as it isn't, it's a super league of just the Premier League running things?
Yeah, it's a big concern. If you go to the transfer I just mentioned, Granit Xhaka, Sunderland, who are expected to fight against relegation for most of the season, have brought in a guy who 2 seasons earlier was one of the key players in an unbeaten league and cup double in Germany. So that's a huge indicator of the kind of pools that lower ranking Premier League clubs and European giants are fishing in. It's the same ones. You know, you've got Bournemouth, you've got Brighton, you've got teams like that who are going toe-to-toe with some European royalty. And a lot of the time, the Premier League teams are winning. So That's a real concern. I think an even bigger concern, actually, for European clubs, as in on the continent, is the amount of money that's flowing between Premier League clubs. Because actually what it always was your top German clubs would develop these players, apart from Bayern. You know, Dortmund would do it, Leipzig would do it, Leverkusen would do it. They would find these young talents, they would, shine them up, and then they would sell them on. But what's happening is Premier League clubs are really savvy now, a lot of them, not all. And I think you know who I might be talking about. And they will identify players much earlier than they did before. So they're thinking, well, hang on, we don't want that 16-year-old to go to the Bundesliga, play for 4 years, and then we've got to pay 70, 80, 90 million. We want to take them now. So it is getting harder and harder to keep that pipeline of money flowing. And actually, it's going between the Premier League clubs, and it's the European ones who have their noses pressed up against the glass.
Do you think then that is because Premier League clubs are looking for just players who have already played in the Premier League and they're not having to wait for them to catch up?
Yeah, I think there's an element of that. I think also PSR, I think, has brought a certain necessity to this, because I think clubs deal with each other. Clubs go, right, well, I need this, you need this. If we swap these guys, we can sort our books out, sort your books out, and it's all good. And we've seen that a few times now, so I think you're getting more of that. And also it's easier for players because they're already settled in the country, in a lot of cases already speak the language, so that's maybe an easier deal to do. So there are still hundreds of millions of euros being pumped into continental Europe. There's a hell of a lot more being pumped into other Premier League clubs than there was before. And I think that's what's really got some of the big hitters in Europe running scared.
So where does that leave then the other European teams, the lesser ones, if we can call them that, who can't compete on the same level as the big Goliaths in the Premier League, and as you mentioned, Bayern in the Bundesliga, for example? Does that mean that they end up going a little bit further afield? Because I know that Japan has become a really good hunting ground for Bundesliga sides, and now even you look at Spurs signing Kota Takai, who was called Japan's Van Dijk by the national team club, national team coach. He's now gone over to Spurs for only £6 million. And I was going to ask a question on that as well, Kevin, whether you think it's a little bit offensive, probably isn't the right word, but do you think that these Premier League clubs undervalue Asian players a little bit? Because this is the same guy who broke the transfer record in the J-League, now going to Spurs for £6 million.
I think what you're getting is Premier League teams catching up with what some continental teams have already known. If you look at the Bundesliga, there's actually a really long-held tradition of Japanese players, South Korean players coming into the league and doing very well. I mean, I think of Makoto Hasebe, who played until he was 40, pretty much, for Eintracht Frankfurt, but he won the league with Wolfsburg back in 2009. Heung-min Son, who you talked about earlier on, I mean, this is a guy that was at Hamburg as a teenager, then he was at Leverkusen, so he was a rising star well before he got to Tottenham. And I think, again, Premier League clubs are thinking, in a very cynical way sometimes, but also in a recruitment way, well, we could bring this guy in and there will be a boost marketing wise, but also these guys can play. Wataru Endo did brilliantly for Stuttgart, has just won a Premier League. So I think they are slowly realising, A, there is huge talent in Asia, but also huge marketing opportunities.
Kevin, the Turkish Super League window, that is still open. And we're very excited about that, this side of things on the African continent, in particular looking at Lookman. The move to Bayern Munich, that didn't happen. Of course, to Inter either. And we're thinking, is that maybe a possible reunion with Osimhen at Galatasaray? Could that still happen?
I think it could. I mean, you're talking about a guy who is terrific, has really come on leaps and bounds in the last few years, scored a hat-trick in the Europa League final for Atalanta, and that's etched his name into their history forevermore, and I would say into Italian football history, not just Atalanta's history. But he clearly feels that, like several players in this transfer window, there were promises made to him that were not kept, and he feels that if the offer that Inter made ticked all those boxes, but Atalanta dug their heels in. Now, to be fair to them, the way they've painted it, is that they didn't accede to him joining another Italian club, and they only really would let him join what they believed was an elite club. I would call the Champions League runners-up an elite club, personally. But you've got a terrific footballer there who needs a solution. And I can see him going to Galatasaray. I could see him going to Fenerbahce. I could see him going to Turkey, absolutely. And he's been a real late developer, a real late bloomer. So, yeah, and I think the fact that we're even having this conversation shows you where Turkey have got to, because it's ceased to be just a retirement home. It's become a country that really competes for top talent.
Yeah, the Turkish transfer window closes on September the 12th. The Saudi Arabian transfer window closes on September the 23rd. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there, especially as some of these Premier League sides with massive inflated squads will be looking to offload some players as well. Now, Kev, you mentioned players feeling like promises had been made to them and then those promises not carried through. Let's move on to the big man of the Premier League transfer window, shall we? Alexander Isak. Before we go any further, let's hear from him in his own words about why he wanted to join Liverpool.
I think it's a mixture of what the club is building, but what they're building on top of what the club already is and the history of the club. So I think just me getting the chance to be a part of this, and I want to create history. I want to win trophies, and that's ultimately the biggest motivation for me. And I feel like this is a perfect place for me to grow even further and to take my game and to next level and help the team as well.
Yeah, the big subject of the transfer window. Thank you very much to Liverpool Football Club for allowing us to use that clip and hear from their main man, Alexander Isak.
Yes, so that's Isak lining out why he wanted to join Liverpool. But it was a saga that just went on and on and on. And it was only settled on transfer deadline day. And as we've already mentioned, it was for that British, I should say, transfer record fee. But it has got us thinking and maybe got us all wondering about player power these days. And perhaps it's all shifted towards one side. Maybe, Kevin, you might have a different view on it. I'm not sure. But it kind of does feel a lot of the players who were a little bit more agitated, shall we say, this summer, got their wishes, Kevin.
Yeah, they did. But I think that's always been there. I think that willingness to flex your muscles has always been there. What's different is they're doing it on their own channels now. They're releasing their own statements, they're doing it on social media, and that can apply more pressure. That wasn't necessarily there before. You've always had players who've tried to demand a move, who've tried to force their way out of clubs. I think we have to be a little bit careful with this, if I'm honest, because it's very easy to forget that it works the other way round as well. As soon as the club decides they don't want you, you're off to the loft squad. See you later. You're training with the kids, or you're training completely separate from the squad. So I think while Isak and Wissa and others, Lookman as well, have been seen as these kind of, miscreants pushing their way out of clubs and doing these disgraceful things, I think we do have to look the other way. I think there is a way to play it. I actually think what Kylian Mbappe did was really smart when he was at PSG. Because when he got put in the loft squad because he wouldn't sign the new deal with Paris, he actually turned up to training every day, shook the hands, smiled, took the pictures with fans, did all the right things, and eventually got his move. Now, it's a slightly different scenario with Wissa and Isak because Isak obviously had longer on his contract. So it's really interesting. I think these guys, if they could, would play it that way and do it that way, but they clearly felt that the only way they were going to get out was to push their way out. And
I guess it doesn't work all the time. We saw with Strand Larsen, he tried to adopt a similar methodology to Wissa and to Isak, but he wasn't able to push and move through. It does make me feel a little bit sad for people like Mark Gay, who do all the right things, who are committed to Crystal Palace. We all know that he wanted to move to Liverpool and he didn't down his tools. He didn't put a statement up on Instagram like the others. And yet he's the one whose move fell through at the last minute, supposedly blocked by Oliver Glasner, who threatened to quit if Gay left. So what does that kind of teach players going forward then? That really you should adopt the more hostile approach? Well, again, it's going to come down to personal choice because ultimately
Gay's got a year left on his contract. He is under contract to Crystal Palace. He is their captain. He is a player that they desperately need to keep. And I think Palace have got themselves into this situation, really, because Eze are gone. They had more time to work on this. They left it until right at the end. And if they brought in Eagle from Brighton instead of him going to West Ham, that might have been different. They might have had an opportunity to let Gay go. But I mean, these are age-old problems in the sense that you've got the chairman, Steve Parish, trying to do his best for the club, trying to bring money in. Oliver Glasner trying to do his best to help the football club maintain its momentum. And then you've got a player who would quite like to join Liverpool, thank you very much. But ultimately, he is under contract. I think genuinely what you might get in the next few years is you're going to get shorter contracts. I think players are going to be much more wary about what their contracts are. I think you're going to get release clauses being outlined a lot more publicly. I think the Morgan Gibbs-White thing at Forest, where Tottenham thought they'd triggered the clause and actually there were all kinds of nefarious layers to that, I think that'll get wiped. I think players and agents will be wise to that, and they'll say, look, we'll sign with you, but if somebody comes and offers X amount, you've got to let them go. So I think players are going to take more control, and I think that's a good thing. I think that's a good thing because I think, who are we watching ultimately? And I'm always defensive of clubs as community hubs and loyalty. I get all of that. But these are the guys that make us watch, that generate the funds, that they are. So they have to be rewarded as such. And therefore, I've got no problem really with them at least having some agency over their futures.
And you see, obviously the Wisa scenario obviously is personal to me because it's my club that it involved. So the way he went about things, I don't think was the correct way to do it, especially when you're going down the route of deleting any reference to Brentford on your Instagram history petty. Or even following the club. Very petty. He's since now refollowed the club, but because he got his wish.
Bit late now.
I know. You burnt your bridges there, Wisa.
Yeah.
But the issue I was going to say is that, there was conversations with the Wisa camp and Brentford about this gentleman's agreement, where there was an agreement in place that he could move for a set fee. And like you're saying there, Kevin, that ultimately agents do have a responsibility to get the best deal for their players. And if they are going to suggest that there are gentlemen's agreements, those agreements need to be written down because otherwise there is no proof of this and it might not have ever happened. So just to pick up on your point that you're just saying there, Kevin, ultimately a good agent will have things written down so that they can then go to that club and say, here you go, you promised this and you're not delivering. So, interesting. But a knock-on effect with all of these things, and it may well continue to have a knock-on effect like you're suggesting there, Kevin, because players will be wiser to trying to pull off these moves to try and get these bigger money deals. And I'm not against that either. I'm very much in your camp on that, Kevin, that players have a short career. We talk about it all the time. And with the Wisa scenario, to move to a club that's going to earn him a heck of a lot more money, offer him Champions League football, never had a problem with that. It's just the way you go about it that I had the problem with.
Yeah, and look, there are always two sides to this because Brentford are not stupid, as you well know. They are run by very smart people. And they would have looked at it and thought, we can get more money here. And the way we can get more money is by making this fella look bad. Because Newcastle will want to bring him in. And we know that the pressure will be ramped up. We could get a bit more cash here. So it kind of, there's always two sides to it. The other issue here, which I think is really important, and I think has flown a little bit under the radar, there has been a judgment in favour of a guy called Lassana Diarra. And what it's about is restraint of trade, effectively, and whether the current transfer framework is legal. And the European Court effectively said that it wasn't, and that there were elements that need to be rewritten. Now, that's still all ongoing, and there's a legal case pending. He's taken action against FIFA. That's all still ongoing. The judgment was made last year. Now, there's not been a big fallout yet with that. But what you may get is a situation where players can actually start buying their contracts out. And they can actually start saying, well, you're trying to stop me moving my career on and actually earning more money. I want to go there. So I'll actually just buy the contract out. They're going to compensate me and I'll move. And then what will happen is you'll get a kind of compensation payment that a club gets, which is probably a lot lower than what they would have got before. So that's another issue that I think is going to come hurtling along in the next year or two. And I think will catch a few people by surprise.
Natalie, I'll say, you said Brentford has done some smart business, but you did say not too long ago that you were literally sitting in your car crying as you said goodbye to Brian Bemo. Now,
It's true. It's
Manchester
true. I was crying.
United, so Man United now has a legion of African fans because we loved Mbeumo, and you look at the start that he's had at Manchester United. So that's another team that is saying, look, we're just getting stronger in terms of the recruits that we're bringing on board and the African fans as well that we're adding to our tally.
Manchester United have brought in a new keeper, haven't they, Kevin? Tell us a little bit about Senna Lommans.
Yeah, I mean, he's an interesting case because he's been seen as a rising star in Belgium for quite some time. But he couldn't break through at Club Brugge because he had Simon Mignolet, the former Liverpool goalkeeper, ahead of him. So he decided to go to Antwerp. And last season he was excellent for them. His numbers were great. They had one of the best defensive records in the Belgian Pro League. And largely that was down to him. He made tons of saves according to the data that he wasn't really expected to make. He's pretty aggressive in terms of coming out for crosses, which I think is good. I think it's a bit risky from time to time, but I think it's good. And he's pretty good with the ball at his feet, off his left foot or off his right. So there's a lot to like. My concern would be that if you stick him in as number one almost immediately, we know what the scene at Old Trafford is like. You make a mistake as a goalkeeper, they're on you straight away. And I just think with Onana, he's a really interesting case because if you'd have told me when he left Inter to go to United that he would collapse in the way that he has, I would have found that really hard to believe because there was a guy that was absolutely outstanding, I thought, in the Champions League final for Inter against City. Really should have been part of a winning team that night and had played a big role in getting them there. And so for him to completely lose his confidence in his form in the way that he has is really quite staggering. And I think it tells you more about Manchester United maybe than it tells you about Andre Onana.
Yeah, you certainly need an aura and an ego to play at Man United, don't you? And there is no goalkeeper with a bigger ego than Emi Martinez in this world. How come that deal fell through and why did United look to go in the opposite direction?
I think if I'm being really cynical, and I don't have evidence for this, but if I'm being really cynical, I think Lamans was the cheaper deal in terms of wages and in terms of, commitment. I think they've looked at him as a long-term option. Because it appears that Martinez wanted that move. Obviously, he wasn't involved in the game against Palace, which caused Unai Emery to have some kind of meltdown when he just kept saying Marco Bizot over and over again, like a robot that had gone rogue. So that was odd. So I suspect it's down to that, but I think they've made a really big misstep because, well, a couple of reasons, actually. I think the first reason is he would have been a huge upgrade on what they have. Secondly, he would have been a real character that wouldn't have taken any messing. He's a winner. He's demanding of other players and probably demanding of the coaching staff as well. But the other thing is the way that they put it out in the media was, we really considered this and we've gone with Lamans instead of Martinez, which puts Lamans under just enormous pressure. Because if he makes a couple of early mistakes, what are United fans going to say? They're going to say, oh, we could have had Emi Martinez and we got this kid from Belgium. I just think it's just been handled in a really clunky, odd way. And that's kind of in keeping with what they've done for the last few years, really.
Well, yes, I was just thinking that as you were saying that. The misspend of more than a decade certainly feels as though there's just still a lot more work to be done at Manchester United for them to get it right to perhaps being at their best to be competing anywhere at the top end of the table, but they have spent 200 million on a new front line, and you mentioned him already, Carol. Brian Mbeumo's got off to a great start. I think Matheus Cunha likewise hasn't done too badly. Benjamin Šeško might take a little bit more time, Kevin, but the story of Manchester United is not just about the incomings, but it's also about the outgoings as well.
Well, again, I mean, they made it so clear who they wanted to get rid of that you just slash their value almost immediately. So everybody knows you want to get rid of Garnacho. So Chelsea thought, great, we'll just wait until we get the price that we want, because Chelsea are smart. You look at Sancho, and they've steadily he's not helped himself. I'm a big fan of Jadon, but he's not helped himself. But they've just chipped away at his value over time. The Rashford situation, they ended up having to loan him out again because it was made very clear that he was going to go. And so anytime you have a kind of loft squad or, undesirables or whatever, you are trashing their value, because clubs aren't stupid. They know that you want to get rid of them. So I think that was a misstep, but also the fact that they want to get rid of that many top-line players, Antony included, shows you just how clumsy they've been in the market for so long. I mean, Antony, I must admit, I thought that would work better because he'd done so well in the Champions League. It wasn't just an Eredivisie thing, but again, just seemed to completely lose his confidence within months of getting there. So, yeah, a bit of a mess.
Well, they still managed to sell Antony for 20-odd million. I think Man United, they got about 68 million pounds this transfer window in terms of player sales. Arsenal, on the other hand, barely made it to 10 million pounds. And I think as an Arsenal fan, incomings, fantastic. Outgoings, very, very poor. The only one that has recouped a fee at this point is Jakub Kivior, with an obligation to buy. He's gone to Porto for about 26 million. Apart from that, and you mentioned United made it very clear they want to get rid of some players. Arsenal too, Fabio Vieira, Reece Nelson, Alexander Zinchenko. We needed to get rid of all of them. We couldn't sell a single one. They've all gone on loan. Why are Arsenal so bad at selling, Kev?
It's generally poor recruitment, I think, because at the top end, Saliba's worked out. Although that wasn't certain for quite a while. He had to go out on loan a fair bit before he could convince Arteta to actually give him the keys. Gabriel's obviously worked out. David Raya's worked out. But there's a fair few that haven't. Fabio Vieira I find fascinating because they signed him, never really gave him a shot. And what was really bizarre, I thought, was that they loaned him out last season, let Emile Smith-Rowe go in the same window, and when Ødegaard got injured, they didn't have a profile to replace him. So I thought that was very odd planning. I mean, it's very easy for me to say all these things, but I just think you look at the clubs that do it well, and you compare that to clubs who do it badly, and there is quite a difference, I think, in terms of the recruitment. Look at Liverpool. We've just sold Tyler Morton to Lyon for a fairly hefty fee. He's flying. He's looked really, really good. So what that tells you is they got it right in the first place by bringing him through and bringing him in and then bringing him through. Then they got it right with the loans and the care of him and loaning him to the right place and making sure that he played. And then they had a guy that they realised wasn't going to play. And so they waited for clubs to come in, and he's at a high level. So they got good money for him. Harvey Elliott's the same. Made a fortune with Harvey Elliott because he's a great player who they looked after, and now another club wants to take him.
Chelsea, I mean, when Todd Boehly and Clear Lake came in and they were spending money for fun, we were all thinking, what are they doing? And yet now it sort of feels like, they might bring a player in for a couple of seasons, but then they'll sell them on and make a bit of money out of them. I mean, I think if you look at this window, the money that they spent, they've kind of recouped on the money that they've brought into the club as well, Kevin.
70-odd million pounds for Nicholas Jackson to buy in.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's an obligation that's based on games. So I'm not sure he'll get to that figure. But the fact that that's even an issue tells you that they are really smart at selling. The thing about them, I mean, firstly, if you look at the history of Chelsea, it's not a new thing, actually. They were always very, very good at stockpiling talent and saying, right, these are the guys who are going to play. These are the guys who are our money makers, effectively. So they would bring guys in for a few million, loan them somewhere, sell them for maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 million more, but they'd do it loads. And then the authorities went, I think we need to clamp down on this. And so they put limits on the loans. The problem, I think, is, and I know Chelsea won the Club World Cup for what that's worth, that they are world champions, as their fans will keep telling us. But with that, I do think they'll struggle at the top level, because if you keep on trading, which they're doing, and they're doing it successfully to a certain extent, I just think you'll unsettle your players. I think you'll find it really difficult in the long run to have a really settled squad that really feels at home. I just think Jamie Gittins, straight away, you've spent quite a lot of money on a young guy there. You've brought him in, and you've brought Garnacho in as well. And I know Garnacho can play a few positions, but you've suddenly got options on that left-hand side. Neto's there as well. So is Gittins going to get the run of games that he needs to actually get to the next level? So I get it. They're very good at it. Is it worth it? That would be my question. Is it actually worth it?
And they're so the opposite of what Pep Guardiola wanted at Manchester City. He's all summer has been talking about trimming. I need to trim my squad. I don't like using as many players as I have because I'm disappointing some who aren't playing, etc. And their transfer business was done a long time ago, it feels, apart from obviously Luigi Donnarumma, who they brought in as the keeper from PSG. Just a final thought on him. And do you think he's going to work under Pep Guardiola in terms of, I think one of the reasons Luis Enrique wasn't exactly best pleased with him was his inability to distribute the ball as well as he wanted.
It was the reason, effectively, and he was quite open about it. He said, look, this is on me. I made this decision. He's a great guy. He's won us the Champions League, but we want a different profile of goalkeeper. And so they would turn to Chevalier, and it was, arrivederci to Donnarumma. So pretty hard, really, but that's what Luis Enrique is like. As soon as you're off the list, you're off the list. See you later, you're not coming back. So Colin Moani's just found that out as well. So what fascinates me is the Guardiola thing, because he's clearly in the Pep lab. He's clearly seen something that he likes. He's thought, right, I can make him better. I can rebuild him. I can make him, good with the ball under pressure. I can, make him maybe a bit more secure under the high ball. I can do all that stuff. And then we can add that to what he can already do. So I find that fascinating. But yeah, he is hilarious because he's been talking about getting rid of players. All he's done is bring players in for ages. They brought in Cherki, they brought Ait Nouri in, they brought Marmoush in, they brought Husanov in. The last 2 transfer windows, they brought tons of players in, and then this squad's too big. Do you think? Okay. Yeah. Right, Reinders as well is going to be amazing. I do genuinely think that's one of the smartest signings. I'm gutted about Cherki because I think he's going to be out for the next 2 months. I'm a bit gutted about that because I think there's a really, really good footballer. So, yeah, they're in a bit of a strange position. And I think we might see a couple more outgoings as well.
Well, look, we talked about Pep and the fact that he's not really been able to shift many players. One player who has left Man City, albeit temporarily, is Jack Grealish. And that moves us nicely on to the best hidden gem signings this transfer window, because I'm going for Jack. I think Everton have pulled off a real coup in signing him. 4 assists in 3 appearances. No doubt about it, he was stifled under Guardiola. Whether or not we can blame Guardiola for that, it's just the way he plays, and Jack didn't fit in. He was asked to do a very different role, but he seems to have got that freedom back now at Everton. He can let his qualities shine through. He can take on men, and I think he'll force his way back into the England squad for the World Cup if he continues this way for Everton.
Nice.
Hidden gems, Carol.
I'm going to continue talking about Sunderland, and I think a welcome return to the Prem for Xhaka. In the middle of the park there is where you'll find the Senegalese Diarra. Watch out for Habib Diarra. I think he's going to have a really, really great season. Of course, we've got the Africa Cup of Nations coming up this year, so that could be a bit of a stumbling block with so many African players signed by Sunderland. But I definitely think Diarra is the gem for them.
Natalie?
I want to see how well Harvey Elliott does at Aston Villa. We've only ever seen flashes of it at Liverpool, but what he did in the summer for the under-21s, part of that winning team, I just think it'd be great to see him get the proper run out in a team, and hopefully he'll get that with Aston Villa and Unai Emery. So, yeah, I'm hopeful that he'll have a good season with them.
And Kev, before we started recording, we welcomed you on. We figured that you would go for some really obscure pick for your dark horse, your hidden gem. Who have you chosen?
Well, Carroll's stolen mine, actually. Habib Diarra was going to be mine because I think he's terrific. But I did say when he signed that I thought he'd be a really good fit for this team. And even though they've signed 6 million players since then, I still believe it. Dan Ndoye at Nottingham Forest. I think he's if Nuno stays, big if. But if Nuno stays, I think he's perfect for Nuno football because it's all about soaking up pressure, hitting on the counter. He carries the ball incredibly well. He's already been involved in goals for Forest. He did brilliantly for Bologna, scored the winning goal in the Coppa Italia final last season. He scored against Germany at the Euros for Switzerland. And I think he's a player that can go up a level or two in the Premier League. So Dan Ndoye at Nottingham Forest is mine.
There you go. 4 different names then to look out for in this coming season. Kevin, it's been great as always. Thank you for being with us.
Pleasure.
And now, before we go, it's worth mentioning the UEFA Champions League, as the draw has now been made for the league phase. This is the second year where the first part of the competition is now a huge 36-team league instead of the previous group stage. And each team plays 8 games, 4 at home and 4 away, to try and reach the knockout phase. There are some fantastic fixtures that we will get into. Some teams will be happier than others with the draw. First of all, Natalie, I'm assuming you watched the draw as I did, but can I just say, to the casual viewer, it is quite hard to follow what's going on in that draw.
It's the most complicated draw ever. And it really doesn't need to be that complicated. It doesn't feel like it should be anyway. Yeah, I mean, you end up sort of just thinking, right, so what does that now mean? And where does that put that? It's all it's very confusing. But hey-ho, that's what we've gotten used to now, haven't we, with all of these draws that do seem to just get more and more complicated. That being said, obviously massive excitement here in Europe for the next phase of the Champions League and seeing whether or not PSG can defend their title. As we all know, it's really difficult to defend the Champions League or any European title, really. So it'll be interesting to see how they will stack up. But I want to know, before we really sink our teeth into what's happened in here with the European Champions League, how does this sort of, as a competition, in terms of the viewers, the fans, with you, Carol, in South Africa and in Africa in general, how big is the European Champions League?
It really, really is big. I mean, this is where you get to crown the champions of Europe, such a big region for football, for the beautiful game. And where we continue to celebrate a lot of our players as well that play for all of these different teams, those players of African descent that play for teams all across Europe. So it's a very, very big competition and one that we're celebrating. You talk about how complicated it has become, but we're just loving the fact that there's just so many more games, on Champions League nights, very, very busy because you get to watch all of the games live. So lots of channel hopping as well.
So why don't we talk about then the draws that have been good for certain teams? And I'll start off because as an Arsenal fan watching that draw and finally understanding who we are going to play in the group stage, I've got to say I'm pretty happy. Arguably, Arsenal, the biggest club to have never won the Champions League. They reached the semi-finals last season, and I think we've got a good chance of at least going to that stage again. We face Atletico and Bayern Munich at the Emirates. The toughest away trip is probably going to be Inter Milan, but since Simone Inzaghi quit, they're kind of in this transition period at the moment under Christian Chivu. And a big result for us is that, yes, we have to play Karat Almaty, but that's going to be at home rather than doing the 4,200-mile trip to Kazakhstan for a much more difficult away game. Who else do you think, Natalie's looking at that draw, rubbing their hands with glee and thinking, oh, we got off lightly here?
Cool. Well, do you know what? I think it's the beauty of it is it's because you don't have the 2 legs as such with a home and away encounter, whoever you're facing in the old group stage. I think the new league phase makes it. I don't think there's any particular sort of team I look at and think, well, they've got an easy one, because it's a one-off game at the end of the day, and you've still got to be at your very best, whether it's at home or whether it's away. I mean, actually, one of the teams I was looking at, and a team not many people will mention, I'm sure, in Club Brugge, who, when I saw what they were rewarded with, I felt so sorry for them. They put 9-1 past Rangers in an aggregate scoreline in their playoff round against them to reach the Champions League phase proper, and then they get rewarded with Barcelona, Bayern, Arsenal, Atalanta, Marseille, Sporting, Monaco, and Kairat, like you mentioned as well. And I just thought, crikey, you know what? You've already had to qualify for this tournament, and they clearly don't want you in it because the draw is the hardest one that you've got in some ways. But yeah, in some ways, like I say, I don't look at these draws and ever think now that it's that easy, because I just think one-off ties, anything can happen with them, Edward.
Yeah. No, I think that is the good point, though, isn't it? Once you qualify for the Champions League, you want to play the big clubs. So I guess in a way they're appreciative of, getting to face the European giants. I would say PSG, Carol, probably have one of the harder draws. Is that fair to say? Bayern at home, Barcelona away, Atalanta at home, Leverkusen away, and then Spurs at home. There's some pretty heavyweight clashes in there. Although I guess, looking back to last season, they barely got out of the league stage, and then we know what happens. Maybe history will repeat itself.
Exactly.
When we talk about PSG, Carol, of course, Africa is such a massive continent, and you cover all the way down to South Africa, you go all the way up to Morocco as well, and you look at someone like Achraf Hakimi. How much is there African attention on these players from all across the continent in these big European clubs?
A lot of attention, most certainly. I mean, you look at a team like PSG, even though Liga doesn't get as much focus as some of the other leagues across Europe. When you look at some of the famous moves and players that have plied their trade at PSG, that's only allowed them to grow in stature and popularity on the African continent, just bouncing off of how big La Liga is, and players like a Messi, for example, and the moves that he's been able to make, which has only made a team like a PSG also grow in stature on the African continent. Yeah.
Because of the Brentford connection, I am keeping an eye on Tottenham and how they're going to fare with Thomas Frank in charge, just because it's his first ever sort of spell as a manager in Europe, and there's no bigger competition to be involved in than the Champions League. And, they haven't got the easiest. Again, I know I've earlier on just said I don't think there's any easy sort of ties for anybody, but I certainly don't think they've got easy ones, have they? Well, they've got Dortmund, they've got PSG, Villarreal, Frankfurt. There's a few in there, Slavia Prague, Bodo Glimt, that I'm sure they'll be looking at as winnable fixtures, but then Thomas Frank will take on a Danish side in FC Copenhagen, and there's Monaco too for them to face. So I'll be a little bit biased. I'll be hoping that Thomas Frank does well, which is a bit weird to say when it's a former manager or a former player, but I love Thomas Frank, so I want him to do well. But I'll be looking out for Tottenham and seeing how they get on, certainly.
Well, in South Africa, we've got a lot of Spurs fans as well. And Natalie, let me tell you something. Last season, there were a lot of fans and a lot of football fans, rather, on the African continent that also loved Brentford. I was one of those. If you look at Wisa and Wemu, flying the African flag very, very high, having such a big, big effect on the Prem. So you've got support. You've got support.
Right then, before we go, I know it is very, very early on, but let's get some preliminary predictions for who is going to win the Champions League. We'll start with you, Natalie.
Oh, gosh. Well, having gone through our transfer roundup and it being a really, really strong summer for the Premier League sides, I can't really see it not being a Premier League team. So I'm sorry, Edward, I'm going to go with Liverpool, just as though I feel as that is why they've brought in so many players. And so I'm going to have to go with Liverpool. It's a really obvious choice, I'm afraid, but that's who I'm going with.
Carol?
Yeah, I took the words right out of my mouth. I was also going to say Liverpool. They've hogged the headlines when it comes to a transfer deadline, and just some of the moves that have been made there. The way that they've started in the Prem so far, they're looking unstoppable. So I'd also have to say Liverpool are looking good for it.
All right, I think with Liverpool, yes, they got a good chance, but the fact that they weren't able to get Mark Gay towards the very end of the window, I think they're still short in defence. And I think if Konate or Virgil van Dijk suffer a big injury, then they're really going to struggle across all competitions. So I'm going to go with the second biggest spenders in the Premier League this transfer window, and that is Arsenal. And I know that nobody else is going to go for them. So, hey, at least I should speak up and support my team if nobody else will.
And we don't blame you for doing that, Edward, certainly. Right, that is it for this episode. Make sure to subscribe to the show via your favourite podcast provider so you never miss an episode, and make sure you leave us a review as well. We've even got video versions of our podcast on Spotify for you to enjoy too, so why not check that out? And you can also watch the show on YouTube as ever, and we would love to hear from you. So get involved with the discussion in the comments below. Let us know what you thought of everything we discussed in this podcast. So who do you think will win the Champions League?
Thank you very much to Kevin Hatchard, and from Natalie, Carol and myself and the rest of the This Sporting Planet team, goodbye for now.